Performance cycle. So I'm going to tell you a little story while we're all seated here, and then we'll get back up and do sculptures in space and a couple more sculpture activities. So the story, I want you to see the performance cycle in action. I showed you one classroom, but I'm now going to tell you the story of the performance cycle with one student. This is in, I don't know which, I think it's chapter 6 or 7 in the book. It's the chapter of Flor. It's the last chapter we wrote of the book. I actually wrote this one, and it's about Flor in Mexico, at our school in Mexico. It's the only chapter in the book that is particularly focused on elementary school students. So this is a complete chapter about an elementary school project that we did at my school, Habla. So let's share that with you. Come on. Come on. There we go. So this is Flor's story. That's Flor. She was a student at our school. Now, Flor was in an English classroom. In our classrooms at school, they're English classrooms where kids are Mexican, they're Spanish speaking, and they're learning English. So it's a language classroom. It's also an art making classroom. So it's a language classroom that integrates the arts. Her teacher said Flor was always by herself, always apart from the others. She didn't seem very confident. When she offered ideas in the classroom, they didn't relate to anything anyone else was saying. You may have kids like this. She doesn't talk at all. And when she does talk, it was kind of out from outer space, right? She was really afraid to use English and would only speak in Spanish. Come on. We have a direct line, too. But what she would do in the classroom is she would draw pictures. And you can see here Flor drawing pictures. I found a lot of these photos later on that the teacher took. I went back and looked for photos of Flor, and I found this picture of her just sitting in the classroom, and this is what she would do. She would sit there while the class was going on, and she would draw. Here is, we also found a piece of her, some of the first work that she did. Here is a piece of student work where the teacher said, "What are you curious about in the world?" And she said, I'm going to translate it from Spanish to English here for you. I have curiosity about the stars and planets because I can't read that word. How are they formed? And the stars are brilliant, shining. She said, I have curiosity about the animals because they are beautiful and exotic. I have questions about the dinosaurs because they are extraordinary and they're very famous reptiles. But what was interesting about this wasn't just her answers. Carla, the teacher, was interested in the drawings, right? What was between the margins, these beautiful drawings that she did. And these are some drawings that Flor creates. Flor loves birds more than anything. So this young student, this is really not working for me, would create these drawings of birds in the region. Sorry, I can't control this. Okay, I'm going to do it from back here. So Carla noticed that what was between the margins. She noticed these pictures in the margins. And what Carla said is, I wanted to find a way to bring her birds to the classroom, to make them a part of what we were doing. She felt valued when we took an interest in and praised her birds. So here's this student that's pretty much disengaged with language, but is brilliant with visual, right? So the question was, how can we bring the two together? How can we bring her visual acumen into the classroom in order to improve her language? And that's what Carla really did. Now, some teachers would tell her to stop drawing, right? Like, stop doing that drawing stuff and pay attention. But what Carla said was, let's see if we can embrace her drawing, use that in the classroom, and therefore, really develop the class. So the classroom, her classroom, was reading this wonderful book. You may know it, by Peter Brown. I mentioned it to you guys the other day, The Curious Garden. And The Curious Garden is about a boy who, it's a city that's kind of desolate, and he plants trees and builds a garden in the city and gets everyone in the city making this garden to transform the city. Beautiful illustrations, beautiful book. So the class was studying the city and nature. So what they had Flor do was draw pictures of animals, like this peacock. She drew this in her notebook. Then they took the animals and they put them on an overhead projector, on a digital projector, and they blew them up onto the wall. Then they took this kind of large white paper and they traced them to make them larger. Then each student in the classroom got to choose one of Flor's animals. And they painted Flor's animal in any color that they wanted, right? Here's what they look like. What happened eventually was the students put together a performance of nature and city using Flor's animals. And here is Flor with her mother, and her own giraffe, right, taking a picture. And you can see actually in the background there's architecture from the city too that they did drawings of. So it was a wonderful unit where they used the Curious Garden as a core text, and then they created around that text of the Curious Garden, and Flor's drawings became the images for the classroom. The great thing about what this teacher did is she was always thinking about integrating the arts in the classroom so that not just Flor, but so that all students could bring their passions, what they were really interested in, to the table. Here they had to create vehicles of the future. And here's Flor working on a animal-like vehicle of the future that looks like a bird. And they use recycled components, which a lot of you are into. Here they did a performance, and Flor became the bird in the performance, making her own mask and her own wings. Here they did a great project. This is one of my favorites, where they read a book of Native American, from the United States actually, Native American folk tales of how things came to be. One of the folk tales in the book was about how language came to be. So Carla asked her students to write their own story of how language came to be, to change it from what was in the book, to create their own version of how language came to the world. And you can probably guess, where did language come from? Birds, right. And here we have a bird coming down. She drew this picture. A bird coming down to deliver language to these two brothers. One brother's sleeping and doesn't know how to speak, and the other brother's learning language from the bird. Are we connected? I'm going to connect you up, and you're going to hear Flor talk about this.
Hello. Weather is the one is boring. In the night, one bird talks with one boy. The bird is flying. The boy does the story his brother.
Okay, that's just a piece of it, right? So we use videotape a lot in our classroom. This is a few years ago, I was videotaping her doing that. And what I would do is we do call and response. I would read the words of her story back to her, and then she would call it back, right? So it looks like she's just sitting there, memorized it, reading it fluently, but what it's actually is call and response, me reading the words to her, she listening to the words, and then reading them back, and me videotaping, and then editing me out of it, right? So you only see her speaking. But it's through these images, she did the images first, and then she found the language to tell her story. Okay? So that's the story of Flor, but it goes even further in the book. We ended up hooking Flor up with a bird expert in the area in the Yucatan and a photographer, and they went out and took pictures of birds and viewed birds in the fields around Merida. And Flor ended up making her own book of the birds of the Yucatan. And here are some of the pictures from that book. These are all local birds that she first photographed and then drew pictures of. Aren't those wonderful? We have flamingos there. This is my favorite bird, actually. It's called the motmot, or in Maya, we live in a place where there are a lot of, 70% of the population is Mayan, indigenous, and this is called the to in Mayan. And this bird's in our gardens at home. Flor, I think she's like 9 or 10 at the time. I don't know. I don't know exactly how old she was. I think it's like 9 or 10. Carla said she's learning on different levels, not just learning a language, not just about birds, but about many things, learning how to research, even learning how to live life. And I love that. And I think that's really the goal of integrating the experiences in the classroom like this so wonderfully. Okay, call and response. Let's not do that. We did that yesterday. Sculpture garden we did. And let's stop here for a second and we're going to come back up here, and we're going to do a little more work, okay? So that's the story of Flor in the classroom. You can read the whole story in the rehearsing, revising chapter and read the whole curriculum there, okay? Everybody come on up here, and let's get back to doing some fun stuff.